Hello, everyone. Welcome to the bi-weekly Cluster API vSphere provider meeting. I am going to go ahead and post the meeting notes in the chat. If everybody can you go ahead and open up the document and add your add your information to the attendee section. So today, I've asked people to go ahead and add agenda items, and I don't think it's going to be a big. It's not going to be like the last two meetings where we have a lot to discuss. I think. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So the first agenda is by Siddharth. He wants a better way to point to the template VM to be used by the machine spec. So let me explain. So in the machine.yaml file that you feed into the cluster CTL or you feed into the cluster API, there is a section in there that specify VM template. And Siddharth, why don't you go ahead and take it from there and then explain what you want.
Sure. You can hear me properly?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so as Locke mentioned, so today in the machine spec that we use to define the machine, it has a one property called template, which today happens to be the name of the VM that we want to use as the template. Now it's okay, but it is having just the name as the search criteria is a little bit of error prone, primarily because you may have within the same vCenter inventory, for various reasons, you may have duplicate names. Therefore,
hey Siddharth, could you just to set expectation, can you tell everybody what the template?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Of course. So, okay, so to give you a background on this template, VM is what is being used. For example, when you create number of machines, this VM template, it gets cloned to a new instance and gets reconfigured accordingly to create the template, to create the VMs that essentially serve as the Kubernetes nodes, including both worker and master nodes. So that's essentially what this template is. Okay, so now going forward, essentially what I was saying is the name of the template that could potentially be duplicated within the vCenter server. Therefore, we have a chance where the user might want to give a template VM name and that matches multiple. So it's kind of not very unique. So what I was proposing was maybe we should break it down into a few different options that the users can choose potentially to provide a unique reference to this template VM. So my proposal was maybe we can break it down into, instead of having just the template field, we can instead of that have three optional fields. So for example, one could be, let's say, template UUID. This could be an instance UUID of that VM, which uniquely identifies that virtual machine. Other option could be like a template reference. This could be the MOREF value, the managed object reference of that VM. And the third option, of course, is the template name, which is what we are using at the moment, which is if you want to use name as the way to find this template. Now, the way I kind of see this is like these three will be, there's a precedence in between these fields. So for example, you only have to specify as a user just one of those, not all three. But even if you have specified multiple of these, the way the logic could work is if you have specified, for example, say a template UUID, then that is always the winner. We'll always go by that. And if that doesn't match, we'll error out. If you don't have specified UUID, but you have the VM, like the template reference and template name, then that same thing will happen with template reference followed by the template name. So it's so that we can still continue. If someone knows that in their environment, the name will always be there and unique, sure, they can still continue to use the template name since it's easier to look up into the vCenter server and put it in the YAML file. Now, the other thing is like about the template reference, which is a managed object reference, as well as the template UUID, which is the instance UUID of the VM. these two properties in general are not really visible into the vSphere client. So if you were to go to the vSphere H5 client today and you browse to a particular VM, at least from the GUI, you don't see these properties directly. Although now in the URL, you actually see both of these. So you could potentially extract it from there, but there's not really a very perfect way of kind of dealing with these. But for most parts, I mean, essentially people who are familiar with vSphere infrastructure, they already know how to get a VM reference or how to get an instance UID of a VM. I mean, if we want, we can probably also document some simple ways using, let's say, GoVC to say how you can, given a template VM, how can you get the corresponding template reference or the UID of it, which you can then eventually use in your YAML files. Primarily, I think this would be helpful, especially with automation and things like that, where you have a lot of things going on and names might become duplicate because of just automation, like multiple deployments at the same time happening. So that way, a UUID or a template reference might be a better choice. And since these are queryable by APIs, they can easily be queried and then plugged in.
Hey Siddharth, question. What will be the benefit of having both UUID and MORAF? I mean, they serve the same purpose as far as I understand.
Yes, so that's a valid question. So I just kind of listed out essentially as possible options, but you are completely right that, template like MORAF value, I'm actually on the borderline that maybe we should not even have the MORAF value, but just template UID and template name. And the reason for that is, template MORAF, it is unique. However, if you unregister and re-register the VM, then that goes away. So in that sense, actually, I mean, if the general idea is okay, then maybe we can just settle out on template UUID and the template name. I'm completely fine with that. I just want to gather feedback as in what others have to say. And just to let you know that, MORAF is also an option if you have to.
Now, I guess the rationale would be something like if you have, a way to specify the UID, which would be the most precise option. If you have, as you said, multiple instances of the same VM, with the VM with the same name, and if you want to use a UID, then it's actually even easier to parse because UIDs have a specified structure, while MORAFs are more like you have to parse them and figure out if it's a MORAF or not. UID have a structure you can verify against when you read it out from the YAML file. And if it's not a UID, then you fall back to a name of the VM. It's probably much easier to implement as well.
Yeah, I kind of agree that we should just use one. And if UUID is unique, then I say just get rid of the MORAF.
Yeah, so that's fine. But just to point one thing is essentially so there are two ways we can deal with this. Either we can still use the same field called template and just override just provide an override in terms of what value we provide, and we parse and we kind of figure it out, whether it is a template UID or a template name. Or what I was thinking is just to make things more explicit so that the users who are pulling into this YAML file, they know exactly what they're doing. We can actually remove the template field and replace it with these two optional fields that they can choose either of them, either a template UUID or a template name, so that we don't have to necessarily even guess, for that matter, that whether this is a UUID or not. If the user has given me a template UUID field, then we are going to use that, period, right? I mean, we don't even have to.
To be honest, I'm very against having more options than less.
Okay.
There's a lot of YAML files that have to be created already. Adding more, I mean, I'm strongly advocating for less is more in this case. So.
Okay.
So
I kind of
Fabio. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, agree with Fabio. I think we probably want less option than more options. The question to Siddharth here is, your requirement is coming from automation, but how about the production environment? How it's really happening that in the production environment, people are having duplicates templates name, or actually, in most cases, they're unique, and this is kind of an advanced feature we are discussing.
So in general, I would say, I mean, as a general vSphere user, I would imagine that they'll probably try and ensure that all the VMs have unique name, because I think to some extent, even the UI, for example, when you're creating a new VM from a UI, it enforces that, okay, you can't have a duplicate name. However, that can be overridden if you're using API and automation. So that's where I'm kind of a little concerned that depending on the environment to environment, there is of course a slight chance that there could be a duplicate name, and I just want to make sure that's the case that we're kind of covering.
So Siddhartha, you told me that with your product, you guys will see this.
Yes. So just to
you don't have to describe your product or anything.
Right. But I can just give you the general problem is pretty much the same. I mean, imagine that if you have, let's say, an OVF, like an appliance product, which has, let's say, a bunch of VMs inside that appliance. The number of times you deploy that appliance on the same vCenter server, the VM names inside that appliance will still stay the same. They're not going to change. So that means if you deploy, let's say, an appliance with multiple VMs 2 times, well, you're going to have those names duplicated again in the vCenter environment. So that's like a simple use case where things might break. I mean, regardless of what product that appliance is serving, but so that one. So the other point that I just want to make sure that we all at least understand. So we could use, for example, just the template property as one single string to utilize. Now, the only case is, there's always somebody can try and cheat the system. For example, I want to give a UUID, but if I give my name of the VM also as a UUID, I mean, it's just like if somebody wants to trick the system, they would be able to trick the system to falsely, use a different template VM than what they intended to, or what the end user intended to. So that's the only worry that I have if we overload like the template field. Unless someone has like a better solution to maybe how we can avoid that problem with a single field.
I mean, if it's a UID and we verify it's a UID, then we'll search for that UID in the inventory. So we'll end up using the right VM anyway. There's an order of
Well, there is one case, right? So imagine that you have a VM with some instance UUID that right? Mm-hmm. And you wanted to use, let's say, that particular VM for the, actually, yeah. So let me go the other way around, actually, sorry. So let's say if you have a template VM wherein you named it with a UUID, because let's say it's generated by some CI or whatever, right? So let's say the VM name happens to be in a UUID format. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say your intention was to use that VM named that particular UUID as the source for this template, and just so happens that there is another VM which has matches the instance UUID. Even though it's different name.
I get what you're saying. The thing is that if you have UID taking precedence over the VM name, then you can test the UID. You can test whatever is passed as in the template name. Test if it's a UID. If there's no UID of that, that value, then you can search for a VM name of that UID. Then pick that up.
No, the idea is if, let's say, searching by UUID and searching by name both turn up a VM, and 2 different VMs, then which one do you choose?
Well, like Fabio said, take the UUID one takes precedence.
That's true, but then that may or may not be the intent of the person who wrote that example, what I'm saying.
I see what you're saying, yeah. So,
the chances of that happening is like really, really slim, in all practicality, but it is a very corner case scenario. So
whoever operates this environment has to make up their mind.
Yeah, that's okay. We can put a disclaimer there that we prefer that you use always as a UUID and then use it here and not the name. We can always put that as a disclaimer. And we can just document this is a very simple corner case that we can document easily. So I'm okay with that.
Okay, so Darth, one more question. You claim that today customers generally know how to look up the UUID of the.
So then looking up UUIDs, essentially if the customers, they are using, let's say, any sort of API, SDK, then they probably already know how to get that. Let's say if they're not using API or NDA, the other way is if they know how to use MOB, like the managed object browser that is there with every VC. Even if they know how to use that, then they can get it. The other cases, of course, we have the tools like GoVC and any sort of a Power CLI, all of those client-side CLIs that people can use to query the UUID. I mean, for simplicity's sake, I guess we can maybe document, like, these are how, like, few common ways to query it using different things, I guess, that we can document for ease of use for users.
I mean, UID is a pretty popular way of, doing automation in vSphere.
Yeah.
Even with, other tools than GoVC or GoVMom, PowerShell.
I was just thinking of this scenario where an admin deploys the cluster API, and then he gives the some credentials and some of the kubeconfig to a developer who would then create their own cluster. And the developers, I know at least a lot of developers who are not BI admins or vSphere knowledgeable. They're quite frankly afraid of vSphere because they don't know very much about it. And I guess in that case, the administrator can give them the UID of the VM template.
Or they can use a name.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they could use a name. Yeah.
I mean, they could use a name. I mean, the chances of that name being unique, different. I mean, I think one thing is in our GoVMami code, what we can ensure is, let's say if somebody was using a name and we do end up getting a duplicate, we just want to make sure that that information is readily available and effectively communicated to the end user. So maybe if they do, let's say, some side like a kubectl get events, then maybe that should show, or probably even we can do kubectl get machine. And kubectl describe on a machine, and in the machine status, we can, I think there is a field for errors to basically percolate the errors, and we can probably print out error there that, we have detected that the template name you're using is duplicate. Please narrow it down by UUID.
Okay.
So we can probably make it easier for the users to get the error message in case if they do encounter into a duplicate name, I guess.
Okay. So Siddharth, you have everything that are you satisfied with the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, so okay. I think just to summarize so that we're all on the same page quickly. So we are going to use the template property as is. So we're not introducing new properties, but we're overloading the template property. And the string value, if it matches the UUID pattern, we'll try and search using instance UUID, like find by instance UUID. And if it turns up a match, we're going to use that. If it doesn't, then we'll fall back on trying to search it by the name using that string. And in case if the name turns up to be multiple VMs, then we'll make sure that in the machine status, the appropriate error message at least is shown there so that the users can take a look and identify real quick that what the problem is.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
So let's move on. The next topic that we want to discuss is CI/CD update. And Hui, do you want to discuss this?
Yes. So we added to a pre-submit job last week to our cluster API provider vSphere. Yeah. So when people open the pull request, so people should see there's a job running by Traverse CI, and it's doing from end-to-end testing of a cluster CTL to actually deploy a cluster to VMC environments we have. And it still has a limitation. The limitation is because our E2E test is running on the VMC. We have credentials managed or stored in the CI process, so that for now we have to limit who can actually invoke this CI. For now, we kind of limits to the people actively contribute to this project. So we have Fabio, Locke, Sidar, and me currently. So it means for now, only those people have open a pull request, and the CI are going to run. For others, the CI are going to be skipped.
Okay, so this is only temporary, right? So once we're able to move to Prowl, outside PRs should run the pre-submit.
Yeah, that's the ideal situation. So actually, last week I worked with Andrew Kurtz from our team, and he shared some experience of how to kind of manage the credentials separately from the Traverse CI. And after some experiments and tryout, turned out didn't work out as we intended previously, because everyone can actually change the Traverse CI. The whole file can be modified by any pull request. So that's actually still if we try to kind of use our own server to share the secrets or the credential, it's still not going to work. So the ultimate solution is actually Prowl, to integrate with Prowl. And because Prowl has a mechanism, so Prowl doesn't run all their CI job automatically. It's require their sender either a Kubernetes member, or need a Kubernetes member to say okay to test. That's actually kind of a security method, because it's filtered out the untrusted users or untrusted senders. So we basically need that to make sure our credential is not be stored by stealed by hackers, if there is. And so basically our plan is we do plan to move to Prowl, and I plan to talk to the SIG testing to see how easy to migrate to that. We may have the foundation already, because all of our CI jobs are running container and running as jobs. So we will see how quickly we can move to that.
Okay. Do you want to mention anything about the registry?
For now, yeah. Yeah. For now, I think for the CI job, we are using Docker Hub over kind of it's not an official Docker Hub account, but my Docker Hub account to store all the CI images. But yes, we eventually want to move to maybe the VMware one, or if the community established some standards, then we should adopt to use the standard one.
Are you going to move to try to use a locally deployed registry?
The locally one, not for now, because I'll explain a little bit later. But for now, the reason we are not using local one is we actually have, for the VMC environment, we kind of have we running things on Traverse CI, then we also running things on VMC, and they are not running in the same place. So it's not easy to just have one local setup, and the VMC VM or pod can access. And I thought about that idea, but I think we still need a kind of a public registry right now. That's where we use the Docker Hub.
Okay. Okay. Let's. Do you have anything else to talk about in CI?
Yeah, I do. I do want to add a note here for the CI work. If any of us or any of you is changing the machine spec, for example, the CDR just proposed for their template name. If there's an actual field change, then we actually need to update the CI code as well, because the CI code is actually deploying a machine using the machine spec, and if the machine spec itself changed, so we have to update the CI. Another thing is if we update the cluster CTL itself, we also need to update CI, because right now we haven't kind of published the cluster CTL binary as a process. So we kind of maintain that binary in the CI image itself. We can think about that and separate it, and maybe it's the same as the machine controller container. We publish the cluster CTL as a container.
Yeah, so I'm not. We can do that as something temporary. I mean, we can put the cluster CTL into a container, but eventually cluster CTL will be built in the main repo. Right now, it's just temporarily hosted in the provider repo, but that's not long term. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. So it might be a good idea to put cluster CTL into a container.
Okay, but let's say for the near term, do you think we need to move this cluster CTL binary out of the CI image? Because yeah, I know the main repo one probably is going to take some time. And
have you done any testing? Have you integrated the cluster CTL into the periodic testing that you were going to do?
Even for the pre-submit test, the CI job we're running is going to run cluster CTL.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, so could you ask your question again? If we need the binary.
Yeah, the question is, we put the binary into the CI image itself for now, which is there, and so that's why I'm saying if you actually change the code, the cluster CTL code, you have to update the CI image as well.
Yeah, I see.
The question is, do we want to separate them in the near term?
It sounds like yeah, I think the cluster CTL will be changing quite a lot in the next couple of weeks. At least I plan to add some bunch of stuff. I would moving the cluster CTL into a container help with that? So that
yeah, we can do that. We definitely can do that.
Okay, then
Okay.
let's do that. Let's do that.
Okay, I'll probably create an issue to check, and
I think there might be an issue already. It was a legacy issue in the main repo, and I copied it to the vSphere provider repo when we created the repo. So I think that issue exists.
Okay, I'll search for that. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so the next two items, I just want to give an update. So we've been doing the CRD migration for the provider. We're in now like the third week of this work. Last week we were able to get it to build and to install, but the CRD changes are not fully working right now. And I wish I could give an estimate of when I believe this will be finished. I'm hoping it'll definitely be finished by the end of this week. It's just going to require some debugging on my part, yeah, I just don't know I can't give an estimate of when it will be done, but hopefully this week. So that's the only update I have on the CRD. Now, the kube book. So this was discussed in the main repo, in the main cluster API meeting last week. I think it was last week or the week before. That the main repo is going to have a kube book documentation, and that every provider repo should also have their own kube book as the documentation. Now, the thing about the kube book is that it's not very useful unless it's hosted, right? So I know on a previous open source project we worked on, I noticed that VMware has some kind of a hosting solution for serving kubebook. I know that the documentation for the VIC product, a lot of that is hosted as a kubebook documentation. So maybe I'll ping somebody to find out how we can host a vSphere provider kubebook. And we also need to start that book. And the migration to CRD will serve as the basis of that, the kubebook documentation. Okay.
Hey, Locke. So
Yeah.
for this cube book, which I think is going to be used with the Git book markups, right? Git book style markup, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a kubebook. Was I using the wrong term?
I thought it was probably Git book. I think is the cube book is just the Git. Because if you recall, I mean, on the meeting in the upstream cluster API, when they were discussing that, so the gitbook.com, which is the hosting site for Gitbook, it is free for open source and non-profit teams. So one option is we could also just put in a request on the gitbook.com itself to host the VMware Git, vSphere provider Gitbook, and get it that way as well. I mean, I'm not and I'm still trying to recall what was the main course of decision that were done the upstream, and like how are we hosting the upstream cluster API?
It wasn't fully decided. The last meeting, they said that they were going to try to look at. They were going to try to look at GitHub hosting.
Right, and I think somebody brought in there the Gitbook is also free for open source. So I mean, I think maybe either we can probably wait for like the upstream guys the moment they decide on, okay, we're going to use a tool. Hopefully we can either piggyback on that, or we can try Gitbook for that matter. I mean, if that's the markup we're using, gitbook.com is the hosting site for it, and it is free for open source. I mean, I think we should probably just try it out at least.
Well, I know that VMware has some kind of Gitbook hosting. Maybe it is through Gitbook.
Okay.
And we'll go ahead and start the documentation before we figure out the hosting at least.
Right. True.
Okay. So the last topic we'll discuss is the OVA update. Fabio, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I've been working on two fronts for the past few weeks. One is a standalone deployment deployment on a standalone ESX. There's a work in progress PR out there. I'm still having some issues in actually getting the cluster up and running, but that doesn't really matter that much for the OVA problem. Still, if somebody wants to test it, it's I think it's PR 99 on the repo.
Does it currently work?
It does work. It does provision the template and everything, and it gets the. I don't know why, but it's kind of stuck in the process of fetching kubeconfig. Well, it waits for kubeconfig to be ready, and kubeconfig is never ready for whatever reason. So I'm trying to figure out why. In the provisioning process should be fine. So
Okay.
if you want to test it.
Fabio seems like probably the only time when I've seen that problem, essentially if you probably might have SSH into the node directly and seen what's going on, but maybe look at the journal logs on the node. Most likely the culprit is right there. It's like kubeadm basically failed. That's essentially what it is. So,
I think it's related to that. I haven't actually had the time to troubleshoot it in depth, but I think it's because of kubeadm failing in the host for some reason. But again,
what version of Kubernetes are you trying to deploy?
I think 110.1 is probably too old.
Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, because the reason I asked is with the current kubeadm configuration that we have in our repository, that will only work up till 1.11.x. For example, if you try to deploy 1.12.x, that is not going to work because the version of the kubeadm config itself has been revved. So to get to 1.12, we need to do some more steps. There is an issue open for that. So maybe try 1.11.x because I know that at least from the kubeadm config point of view, that should just work. So
I'll give it a try.
1.10 should work. At least in the CI work we are doing is 1.10.
Yeah, I'm trying 1.10.1, so it should be working.
Yeah, I'm also using 1.10.
From the OVA perspective, I've been playing around with this tool called Yakety, which is an OVA based on Photon OS that Andrew Cutts has put together for the CI/CD efforts around Kubernetes and vSphere. It's basically a self-bootstrapping OS with Kubernetes installed. So I was trying to figure out if it makes sense for us to basically piggyback on Andrew's work on Yakety to have our own self-bootstrapping OVA. Looks like there's some pros and some cons. We do have some work we can borrow from the Vic project where we had an OVA and the entire bootstrap process, the entire building process for the OVA is already working and it's being done in a container, so it's very streamlined. It works very well. You just need to adapt that to our own purpose for cluster API. But Yakety is already working on Kubernetes, has a Kubernetes cluster standing up, so it might be worth exploring both options. Right now, I did not reach a conclusion, also because I spent last week in PTO. But I'm working in trying to figure out what will be the best path forward to get something out.
So Andrew showed a demo of Yakety last week, and I saw some functionality that I thought was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's a very simple, but once you deploy the Bootstrap cluster, if you look at the vSphere console, it tells you common commands for you to get the kube config, or for you to SSH into the VM, and that's a nice feature. I know that's very simple to do, but the Yakety Bootstrap OVA already has that.
So my idea right now is to Yakety after all is a collection of shell scripts, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of functionality that can be borrowed as is and being added to an existing OVA building process like Vic. So I was trying to figure out what is the best path forward in terms of, should we just take Yakety OVA as is and base our work off of that? Should we take whatever we need from Yakety and add it to a more established process like the Vic OVA as a basis? Yes. So I'm trying to figure out if it's possible at all, because again, on the other side, the Vic product had a lot of interesting features in the OVA, like having the console UI that tells you if the status of the machine. It can get you. There's a web server already, so you can download kubeconfig from there. There's a lot of stuff that has been built over the years, and it will be nice to even reuse that. But again, we're aiming for something, quick, because we want to have it ready, hopefully by KubeCon. So it's we need to find a balance.
Yeah. Do you know if Yakety, does Andrew build the OVA from scratch like Vic does, or does he use like VMware? What is that tool? Studio?
I haven't asked him, but I think he's building that manually right now. He doesn't have
Okay.
like a.
Well, then that's good, right? That's because that's the simplest way to do it, and that's the best way for people out there in the open source community to build this OVA also.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same that happened for the VIC OVA. The VIC OVA originally was built using Packer, and Packer requires an hypervisor, which doesn't really play well with, hosted CI systems like Travis or even Prow, where you don't have the possibility of running your own hypervisor to build a VM. So the current build process for the OVA for VIC, which is the one that I'm looking at to replicate for the cluster API OVA, is based off just basic Linux commands. It can be run inside a container as well. So it can be run as part of any CI, really. It just requires a little bit more disk space, but that shouldn't be a big of a problem. So I think we're in good shape from that perspective. We just need to figure out what is the best way to get there as fast as possible with the best foundation as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So Andrew commented last week, and I wanted to wait till this week when you were back, that he wanted to have like a meeting where we can talk about the Yakety OVA.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to be? You're not. When does Shanghai start? You're not going to Shanghai this week, right? It's next week.
Next week.
Okay.
I'm leaving on Saturday, so I'll be here an entire week.
Okay, so then we can set up a meeting with Andrew, and then he can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any other topics that anybody wants to bring up at this point? Okay. If there are no other topics, we can finish. We can conclude this meeting and then come back in 2 weeks. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming to the meeting. If you have any comments or question, well, that's a good question. How would you? If you, the meeting is done.
We have a Slack channel. I mean, there's
we have an internal
SIG VMware still works as a collector of questions and answers and so on.
Oh, there are some okay. There were some people on the meeting today from other VMware, from other Dell companies. I was going to tell them about SIG VMware at the end, but I think he dropped off already. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. See you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.